I'm going to read the story of the lighthouse keeper's lunch. Once there was a lighthouse keeper called Mr. Grinling. At night time he lived in a small white cottage perched high on the cliffs. In the daytime he rowed out to his lighthouse on the rocks to clean and polish the light. There's the lighthouse. Mr. Grinling was a most industrious lighthouse keeper. Come rain or shine, he tended his light. Sometimes at night, Mr. Grinling lay sleeping in his warm bed, and the ships would toot to tell him his light was shining brightly and clearly out to sea. Each morning, while Mr. Grinling polished the light, Mrs. Grinling worked in the kitchen of the little white cottage on the cliffs, concocting a delicious lunch for him. Once she had prepared lunch, she packed it into a special basket and clipped it onto the wire that ran from the little white cottage to the lighthouse on the rocks. But one Monday, something terrible happened. Mrs. Grinling had prepared a particularly appetizing lunch. She had made a mixed seafood salad, a lighthouse sandwich, cold chicken garni, sausages and crisps, peach surprise, iced sea biscuits, drinks and assorted fruit. She put the lunch in the basket as usual and sent it down the wire. But the lunch did not arrive. It was spotted by 3 scavenging seagulls, who set upon it and devoured it with great gusto. "Clear off, you varmints," shouted Mr. Grinling, but the seagulls took not the slightest notice. They say, "This is an excellent peach surprise." "Scrumptious lunch, Tom. She's a great cook, Fred." That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling decided on a plan to baffle the seagulls. "Tomorrow I shall tie the napkin to the basket," said Mrs. Grinling. "Of course, my dear, a sound plan." They still managed to eat the food. "They'll have to try harder than this to stop us, Bert." On Tuesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains for another plan. "They're a brazen lot, those seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "Brazen indeed," said Mr. Grinling. "What shall we do? Our cat does not appear to like seagulls. Hamish is an accomplished seagull chaser." "Of course," exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. "Tomorrow Hamish can guard the lunch. A most ingenious plan." Hamish did not think the plan was ingenious at all. He spat and hissed as Mrs. Grinling secured him in the basket. There, there, Hamish," said Mrs. Grinling. "I'll have a tasty piece of herring waiting for you when you arrive home." Sadly, flying did not agree with Hamish. His fur stood on end when the basket swayed. His whiskers drooped, and when he peered down at the wet blue sea, he felt much too sick even to notice the seagulls, let alone scare them away from the lunch. The seagulls still ate the lunch. "Lackaday, lackaday," said Mr. Grinling sadly. "Meow, meow," said Hamish pitifully. On Wednesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains again for a new plan. "What shall we do?" said Mr. Grinling. Mrs. Grinling looked thoughtful. "I have it," she exclaimed. "Just the mixture for hungry seagulls." "Indeed, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "What have you in mind?" "Wait and see," said Mrs. Grinling. "Just wait and see." "Mustard sandwiches." chuckled Mr. Grinling. "A truly superb plan, my dear, truly superb." On Thursday evening, Mrs. Grinling carefully packed the mustard sandwiches and sent them down the wire to the expectant seagulls. On Friday, Mrs. Grinling repeated the mustard mixture. "All right, boys," said the seagulls, "let's go and have lunch elsewhere." The same as yesterday's lunch, Fred. Seagulls didn't like the mustard. So on Saturday, up in the little white cottage on the cliffs, a jubilant Mrs. Grinling put away the mustard pot before she prepared a scrumptious lunch for Mr. Grinling. While he waited for his lunch down in the lighthouse, Mr. Grinling sang snatches of old sea shanties. As he surveyed the coastline through his telescope, this is what he saw. No mustard in this lot, Tom. We'll be back for lunch here again tomorrow, boys. This is a delicious chocolate eclair, Fred. The seagulls had gone on to somebody else to eat their lunch. Ah, well, such is life, said Mr. Grinling, as he sat down to enjoy his leisurely lunch in the warm sunshine. That's the story of the Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch.